Today's lesson is 8-2, day 1, and we're going to factor out the greatest common factor, or the GCF, of a polynomial. What does GCF stand for? It stands for the greatest common factor. What does GCF mean? GCF is the largest factor that two or more numbers have in common. So we're going to look at two numbers and figure out what's the biggest number that they have in common. That's the GCF. It says, what is the GCF of 36 and 54? It says, do not write this. We're going to list all the factors of both numbers. So I can look on my factor sheet and find 36 and 54. And I look at all the factors that are listed there for 36 and 54. They have a lot of factors in common. They have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 6, a 9, and an 18 in common. Now I'm looking for that greatest number that they have in common. Not just any number, but the greatest number has to be the greatest. And here the greatest number that they have in common is the 18. So the GCF of 36 and 54, the GCF of 36 and 54 is 18. All right, go ahead and write down number 1 here. Number 1 says 12a plus 20. And I want to factor the GCF out of here. So I'm going to look and say, okay, what numbers do I have? And I have the numbers 12 and the number 20, and I need to figure out what is the GCF of those numbers. So I'm going to look at my factor sheet. I'm going to look at my factor sheet at the number 12, which is right here, and the number 20, which is over here. Now I'm going to notice what they have in common. They both have a 1, they both have a 2, they both have a 4, and that's all. So the greatest thing that 20 and 12 have in common is a 4. So that's the GCF, because that's the greatest number that I see here that both of them have in their list. So I'm going to go back here. I figured out that my GCF was 4, so I'm going to write it down. I'm going to write down the 4. And then I'm going to draw some parentheses, or the beginning set of parentheses here. And then to figure out what goes inside the parentheses, I'm taking a 4 out of 12 and 20. So I'm going to say either 4 times what is 12, or I'm going to say 12 divided by 4 is what? And that's 3, because 4 times 3 is 12. I'm going to bring down my A and my plus sign, because I didn't do anything with those. Now I'm either going to say 4 times what is 20, or I'm going to say 20 divided by 4. Either way, that's 5, because 4 times 5 is 20. So I've just factored out the GCF out of 12a plus 20. Now we need to go back and check to make sure that we pulled this out correctly. So when I go back to check, I'm going to redistribute and say 4 times 3a is 12a, and 4 times 5 is 20, and I got exactly what I started with over here. So I do have the correct answer. Right, now we're going to look at number 2. Number 2 says 36x plus 12. Please make sure that you have this and the check written for number 1 before you move on. Number 2 says 36x plus 12. So I'm going to look. I have the number 36 and I have the number 12. So again, I'm going to go back to that factor sheet. I'm going to go back to my factor sheet and I'm going to look at 12, which is right here. And I'm going to look at 36, which is right here. So again, they have quite a bit of stuff in common. They have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 6 in common. They also have a 12 in common. So you can see they have a 12 on the 36, whoops, and there's a 12 on the 12. So 12 is the greatest thing that is in both my 12 list and my 36 list. So 12 is going to be my GCF. So once I've looked at my factor sheet and I found out that 12 is going to be the greatest common factor, I'm going to write that 12 on the outside because I want to pull a 12 out of 36 and 12. So again, I'm going to say 36 divided by 12 is 3, or 12 times 3 is 36, however you want to think about that. I'm going to bring down my x and my plus sign. Then I'm going to say 12 divided by 12 is 1, or 12 times 1 is 12. Either way you want to think about that. So I took a 12 out of the 36 and the 12, so I pulled out or factored out a GCF of 12, and this is what I have left. So again, I'm going to go over here and check. I'm going to say 12 times 3x is 36x, and 12 times 1 is 12, and that works out. So there's number 2. Now we're going to look at number 3. Again, please make sure you have this part and the check written before you move on. All right, number 3 says negative 18y plus 27. So I have 18 and 27. So again, I'm going to go back to that factor sheet, my handy dandy factor sheet. All right, so when I'm looking at my factor sheet, I look at 18 and I look at 27 and I say, what do they have in common? Well, 18 and 27 have a 1, a 3, and a 9 in common. I see a 1, a 3, and a 9 in both of my lists. And 9 is the greatest number there that's in both lists, so 9 is my GCF. So now I'm going to go back. Now this time it's a little bit different because of this negative in front. And even though they both don't have a negative, anytime you have a negative in front, I want you to go ahead and take out a negative number. So I'm going to take out a negative 9 because I found out that 9 was the GCF of 18 and 27. So I'm going to take out a negative 9. So I'm going to say negative 18 divided by negative 9 is 2, or negative 9 times 2 is negative 18. I'm going to bring down my y and my plus sign. I'm going to say negative 9 times what is negative 27, or 27 divided by negative 9 is what? Negative 3. Negative 9 times negative 3 is a positive 27. So I'm going to rewrite this just a little bit and say negative 9 and then 2y minus 3. So there is my, where I factored out my GCF. So I'm going to check. When I redistribute, I get negative 18y because that's negative 9 times 2, and negative 9 times negative 3 is positive 27. So that works out. Again, please make sure you have this and the check before you move on. All right, go ahead and write down number 4. I have 16x to the third plus 8x squared minus 4x. Now this time this is getting a little bit more difficult because I have 3 numbers here. I have a 16, an 8, and a 4. All that means is on my factor sheet, I'm going to have to look at all 3 of those numbers. All right, so I'm going to look at the 4, the 8, and the 16 here. So I'm going to be looking at all 3 of those. I'll pencil down for just a second. So the 4, the 16, and the 8, and I'm going to say, what do they all have in common? They all have a 1, a 2, and a 4 in their list. So 4 is my GCF here, because 4 is the biggest number that's in all 3 lists, the 4, the 8, and the 16. All right, so I'm going to take out a 4. So I'm going to write my 4 down. Now this one's a little bit different because if you notice, every single one of these has an x. This one has 3 x's, this one has 2 x's, and this one has 1. So they also have an x in common, so I have to factor an x out as well. And like I said, this one has 3, this one has 2, this one has 1. So they all have at least 1 x. So I can take 1 x out because they all have at least one of them, so they all share at least 1 x in common. So then I'm going to do my parentheses. I'm going to say 16 divided by 4 is 4, or 4 times 4 is 16. Here I had 3 x's, but I took one of those x's out in front. So I have 2 left, so that would be x squared. Then I'm going to say 8 divided by 4 is 2, or 4 times 2 is 8. I had 2 x's here, but I took one of them out, so I have 1 x left, because when I go back to distribute, x times x is x squared. Minus 4 divided by 4 is 1. Now I have to be careful here. I have an x, but I took out an x. So I had 1 x, I took 1 x out, so I don't have any x's left here, so I'm just going to close my parentheses. So I just took out the GCF of 4x out of 16x to the third plus 8x squared minus 4x. We're going to go back and check this. Now when I go back to check, I'm going to multiply the numbers and add the exponents here. I have an exponent of 1 if nothing's there because there's only one x there. So I'm going to say 4 times 4 is 16. I'm going to add these. 1 plus 2 is x to the third, because that's what my exponent properties tell me, that if I'm multiplying with the same base, I add exponents. Bring down my plus sign. 4 times 2 is 8. This has a little 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2, or x times x is x squared. Then I'm going to say 4 times negative 1 is negative 4, and I have to bring that x with me. And I got exactly what I started with. So that checks out. All right, we're going to go ahead and write down number 5. I have 3c to the 4th minus 12c squared plus 6c. So again, I have to look back at that factor sheet and figure out what they have in common. So I have to look at 3, 6, and 12. All right, so again, I'm going to look back at that factor sheet, and I'm going to look at 3, 6, and 12. So here's the 3, here's the 6, and here's the 12. So I'm going to look at all 3 of those, the 3, the 6, and the 12, and I can see that the greatest thing they have in common in all their list is a 3. So 3 is going to be my GCF that I take out. All right, so here I'm going to go ahead and take out that GCF of 3. And I notice this one has 4 C's, this one has 2, and this one has 1. So they all have at least 1 C in common. So I'm going to take out a C as well. So I'm going to say 3 divided by 3 is 1. I had 4 C's and I took one of them out, so I have 3 of them left here. Minus 12 divided by 3 is 4. I had 2 C's and I took one out, so I have 1 left. Bring down my plus sign, and I say 6 divided by 3 is 2, or 3 times 2 is 6. I had a C, but I took a C out, so there's no C's left here. So I'm going to go ahead and close those. I can also rewrite this without this 1 right here. And then I'm going to come over here and check it. I'm going to go ahead and put that 1 back in there for my check, just because I think that helps me. I'm also going to put a little exponent of 1 right here. So I'm going to say 3 times 1 is 3. I'm going to add these exponents. 1 and 3 is 4. Minus 3 times 4 is 12. I'm going to put a little 1 right here. So c to the 1 and c to the 1 makes c to the 2, or c squared. Plus 3 times 2 is 6. And bring my c. And I got out exactly what I started with, so that checks out. All right, we're going to go ahead and write down number 6. Please make sure you have all of that and the check before you move on. We have 5 n to the 3rd minus 8n. All right, so I have a 5 and an 8. And if I look at my factor sheet of 5 and 8, they don't have anything in common other than a 1. Okay, so I don't want to actually take out a 1 if that's the only thing that they have in common. I can take it out, but it's not going to change anything here. But here, if you notice, this one has 3 n's and this one has 1 n. So they do have an n in common, so I can take out a GCF of n. I'm going to bring down my 5. I had 3 n's. I took 1 out, so I have 2 left. Minus 8, because again, I'm not taking out any numbers this time. I had an n. I took an n out, so I don't have any n's left. So I took out a GCF of just n here, because 5 and 8 didn't have anything in common other than a 1. And again, if you wanted to write a little 1 right there, you could have. Again, wasn't going to change anything. When I check this, I say I can put a 1 and say 5 times 1 is 5. Add those exponents and get into the 3rd. 1 times 8 is 8. N, and that checks out. Please make sure you have all that and the check written before you move on. All right, go ahead and write down number 7, 4d squared plus 5. So again, here we have a 4 and a 5, so I'm going to go back to my factor sheet and look at 4 and 5. So 4 and 5, you notice I have 1, 2, and 4 here, and a 1 and a 5 here. So the only thing they have in common is a 1. So since the GCF is just 1, I'm not going to take out a 1 because it won't actually do anything here. And if you look, this has a d squared, but the 5 doesn't have a d with it. So I don't have a GCF of 4 and 5, and both of my terms don't have a d in them. So there's no GCF for me to pull out here. So this cannot be factored. So ones that cannot be factored, we're going to write the word prime. So this one is prime, and prime means that it cannot be factored. There's nothing that I can take out of that or no way for me to factor it. So go ahead and write prime for number 7. Let's look at number 8. Number 8, we have negative 42 h squared minus 14h. So here I have 42 and 14. So again, I'm going to go back to my factor sheet and look at 14 and 42. So I'm looking at 14, which is right here. I'm looking at 42, which is right here. I see a 1, a 2. This one has 1, 2, 7, and 14. This one has 1, 2, and 14 of those. So 14 is my GCF here because there's a 14 here and there's a 14 here. So 14 is my GCF, so I'm going to take out a 14. And since this front number is negative, I'm going to take out a negative 14. Again, if that front number is negative, you need to go ahead and take out a negative. And 14 is my GCF here. This one has 2 H's and this one has 1, so they also have an H in common. They both have at least one of them. So then I'm going to do my parentheses. So this time I'm going to say negative 42 divided by negative 14 is 3, or negative 14 times 3 is negative 42. I had 2 h's here for h squared, and I took one of them out, so I have 1 h left. And then I'm going to say negative 14 divided by negative 14, and that's a positive 1. So I've got to be careful with my signs there. Negative 14 times 1 is negative 14. I have an h, but I took that h out, so I don't have any h's left here, so I'm going to go ahead and close those parentheses. So I factored out a GCF of negative 14h, and I have 3h plus 1 left. We're going to come over here to check that one. So I'm going to say negative 14h times 3h is negative 42h squared, because h times h is h squared. Negative 14h times 1 is just negative 14h. And I get out exactly what I started with. So that does check out. All right, number 9. So this is my final answer right here. Make sure you have that and the check written before you move on. Number 9, I have negative 3k to the third minus 2k squared minus k. If there's no number in front of that k, I'm going to put a 1. So first thing I'm going to do is look at the numbers. I have a 3, a 2, and a 1. And if I look at my factor sheet, the only thing that those have in common is a 1. And I don't usually take out a 1. However, here, since there's a negative out front, I know I'm going to have to take out a negative. And since I'm taking out a negative, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to take out a negative 1. Because I have to take that negative out because of that first one right there being negative. Also notice this one has 3 k's, this one has 2 k's, and this one has 1 k. K to the third, k squared, and k. So they all have at least 1 k, so they have a k in common. So I'm going to say negative 1 times what is negative 3? Positive 3. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. I have 3 k's here. And if you need to see this, you can actually write these out. K to the third is k times k times k. K squared is k times k. And then here's just a k. So they all have at least 1 k. So if you're having a hard time with that, you can kind of look at that. Maybe that'll clear that up for you. So then we're going to say negative 1 times what is negative 2? Positive 2. Whoops. I messed up. Hold on. I take out a negative 1k, and I get 3. And then I said, like I said, I had 3 k's, and I took one of those k's out, so I have these 2 k's left, so that's k squared plus 2, because negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, or negative 2 divided by negative 1 is 2. I have 2 k's, and I took one out, so I have 1 left. And then negative 1 times what is negative 1? That's a positive 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. I had a k, but I took that k out. So I don't have any k's left for that one. So this is your answer for that one. I took out a GCF of negative 1k. Come over here to check. When I distribute this back out, I get negative 3k to the third minus 2k squared minus 1k, and that's exactly what I started with, so it checks out. Make sure you have your answer and your check written before you move on. Alright, we do have one more example that's a real-world example that we're going to talk about tomorrow in class. But you should have all 9 of the other examples. And so now you should be able to factor out the greatest common factor of a polynomial. This is the end of your video. Thank you for watching.